Hello and welcome, and you're watching the special edition of the India Pitch from Tokyo. The Finance Minister Arun Jaitley is in Tokyo and Osaka and will be meeting a whole host of investors as he embarks on his 6-day visit. And this is going to be extremely important, remember, because there are two focus areas for the Modi government. One is infrastructure, and the second one, of course, Make in India. In fact, 2 days in a row, we caught up exclusively with the Finance Minister, asked him on the road ahead in terms of growth prospects for India, and also spoke about the piling NPA mess for the PSU banks. Listen to what he had to say.
The global environment has certainly not been helpful. In many ways, it's also been obstructive. I say obstructive because there's a lot more volatility today. There's a lot more unpredictability today. And more than that, I think the shrinkage of global trade has impacted on all economies, and therefore it's impacted on us. It's precisely for this reason that I mentioned that in a healthful global environment, for an economy to grow much faster, 8 to 9%, is reasonably possible, an economy like India. But when the global environment is very adverse, to then maintain a 7.5% growth rate is extremely critical. Once the growth returns to the world, I think this 7.5% we have a reason to look forward to would enhance. I always believe when the going is good, everybody's at his best. But the testing times it's when the going is very challenging. And the last 2 years, in an unhelpful global environment, a series of policy decisions which we've taken, some very critical areas of spending, I think have helped us to maintain this level of growth.
Sir, but I also want to point out to the fact that our numbers are pointing in two different directions. While at one side, we're looking at a weak IIP. There are times when we see core sector doing better. So the numbers are not in coherence with how we see the economy.
I think your analysis is correct. Our services sector, which is 60% or so of the Indian economy, is doing extremely well. Public investment in a lot of public investment areas then keeps the economy growing. Foreign direct investment is coming in. Manufacturing improving but still patchy. You have to keep your fingers crossed. Agriculture was extremely challenging, almost in a distressed situation in the last 2 years because of bad monsoon. And I think this year, as I look ahead, if the monsoons are what the Met Department predicts they would be, in addition to an increased urban demand, you will have rural demand. Right. And once there is rural demand, I think India's private sector also has something to look forward to, which obviously also means that manufacturing will grow because that has a spiral effect on it.
Right. While much has been done in the last 2 years, bankruptcy bill has been cleared in the last parliament session. Aadhaar has been given a nod by the parliament. But what is in the bucket list for the government going ahead in the next 3 years?
Well, I think I still have my hands full in terms of structural reforms that we require. And I've always said that as far as reforms are concerned, India will never have a finishing line. So you'll have to go on and on with the change situation. For instance, if I think loudly, I'm looking at the direct tax reforms to bring down the taxation rate. Right. I'm looking at an indirect tax reform, the GST, which is, I think, extremely critical. I'm looking at changing the Companies Act, where the bill is in before Parliament. I'm looking at a further investment in forestation through the Campa law. The bill is before Parliament. I'm looking at further strengthening the banks in addition to the bankruptcy code through the securitization and the DRT law amendments. Now, these are the legislative steps. As far as administratively it is concerned, I think in various areas, social areas, education, healthcare, there's a lot more to look forward to. If you ask me what is one of my topmost priorities in the field of education, you have a serious challenge in medical education. Right. You have awfully low number of seats. So when the government is talking of reform process, I think that's a critical reform areas. How do we suddenly give a boost to the number of medical seats in India, increase the number of doctors in India, so that healthcare standards itself improves. And there is something that I've been in touch with the health ministry that they are looking at. Additionally, I think the three critical areas of future will be to continue the spend on infrastructure.
Right.
So this will be remembered as the age in Indian history where infrastructure grew by leaps and bounds. Modern railway stations, modern trains, better air services, more electricity than what we require, bigger highways, rural roads, toilets, more ports. Now these are all areas of infrastructure where we are actually galloping ahead. I think rural India has to get the largest size of the pie. They've been neglected the most, and therefore the maximum resources must go there. And through various instrumentalities, we must use it for funding in those areas. And I think this whole series of steps we've taken now has to become bigger leaps as far as social security is concerned. Any developed economy in the world can't be without a social security package. So far, people have not even spoken about it in India. And I think this is the first government which is taking steps in that direction, and that will have to consolidate over the next 3 years.
Right. Infrastructure, social security, a whole host of structural steps that the government is looking at, but many say this is not going to be possible if we do not have a good macroeconomic situation. Let me come back to that point again, because at this point of time, many say if crude continues to be at this level, at around $50 a barrel, we may not have the kind of benefit that we had earlier in terms of inflation, in terms of our current account deficit. Do you share that concern?
Well, obviously, higher crude prices is not good news for India. But I think if it remains within a range,
right,
as it is at present, it's something that we can handle. If it goes beyond the range, then certainly it creates an adversity. We'll have to deal with that situation if it arises.
Right. One more question, sir, because this push to infrastructure that you're talking about can only happen if the health of the Indian banking system is good. But at this point of time, one of the critical issues that the banking sector is dealing with is with regard to NPA. And according to our own ministry, we have gross NPAs of around 6 lakh crore, which is a huge number. The market and the rating agencies, in a way, are not really convinced about the fact that whether worst is over for the Indian banking system. Can you explain where do things really stand at this point of time?
I think these are not loans recently given. These are old loans. These relate to sectors which have been under stress. Those sectoral problems have been addressed significantly. In many of those sectors, the balance sheet has started changing. And therefore, slowly it must relate to the banks itself and reflect on their balance sheets. Additionally, the banks have to be empowered. The bankruptcy law is one empowerment. The SDR mechanism of the Reserve Bank is an empowerment. What we are doing to several other recovery proceedings laws, the securitization or DRT itself is an empowerment. And therefore, you can't indefinitely have a situation where people who owe money sleep well and the bankers have to worry. I think the people who owe these monies also will now have to act.
Right. But also help me understand, at this point of time, when we've seen many of the PSU banks, banks like SBI, banks like PNB, posting huge losses because of the change in norms.
Look at the balance sheets of these banks. PNB operationally has had a huge profit. SBI has had a good profit. It's the provisioning which makes it look like a loss. The NPA was always there. Whether you keep it below the carpet or you bring it to the balance sheet. Right. And I think a transparent balance sheet is the best way of doing business. And that's what the banks are today doing. Operationally, they are all making. The PNB, for instance, last year made a 12,000 crore operational profit, which is not a low level of profit itself. But because it had to provision for losses, for the NPAs, it declared a loss. So it is a balance sheet provisioning which has led to that situation.
But also, sir, do you see that pain to ease at some point of time going forward?
Well, it would, because once the problem climaxes and those sectoral results change, I think the situation would alter.
But, sir, let me quote one of the reports that were written by inquiry. They are saying that the sheer number of skeletons tumbling out of the bank's closet these days suggests that taxpayers will soon be presented with a huge bill to go forward and pay. And at a time, when we're talking about bank recapitalization, how much more can we see that?
Let me first of all clear the misapprehension. All these NPAs are not bank frauds. There may be some improper loans, but there's a large volume of these loans which are business losses, right, or on account of sectoral losses. The loans were rightly given, those sectors haven't done well. And therefore, to say that these are all skeletons tumbling out, a business loss is not a skeleton. A skeleton is something which is done as a scam or a scandal. Right. And therefore, we must be careful to distinguish between chalk and cheese as far as the banking NPAs are concerned.
So, as far as the recapitalization is concerned, we've...
Well, I am very clear. The government will fully strengthen the banks and fully support the banks to the extent that it's needed.
Is there a figure that we are looking at?
Well, I have declared a figure in the budget, but I am willing to look at a higher figure also if it's necessary.
There is a lot that India can learn from Japan in terms of infrastructure, and while Japan has really helped India by providing soft loans for various infrastructure projects such as DMIC, the dedicated freight corridor, as well as bullet trains, this time the finance minister's meeting included talking about how Japan can contribute, can aid the infrastructure growth story in India. He met a whole host of pension funds and hedge fund managers, and what we're given to understand is that one common thing that everybody spoke about in this meeting is how a whole host of flexibility of options can really be given to investors at this point of time to park their funds in India. Remember, as far as India is concerned, the attractive rate of interest is something that will really attract the Japanese investors to our country. But at this point of time, we spoke to a whole host of experts from FICCI, Harshvardhan Neotia, the president there, and also two key infrastructure players, Hari Sankaran from ILNFS and Atul Punj from Punj Lloyd, on when do they see things really trickling down, when do they really see investments trickling down, and what their view is that 12 to 18 months is the kind of time frame that we will see for money to flow in to India.
I think Japan has led from the front in terms of committing funds for the Indian infrastructure sector. It is not just the high-profile projects that we hear of, right, which is the Shinkansen or the bullet train or some of the other highway projects that they're giving ODA funding to. But significant amount of money has also been given to the roads in the northeast. A lot of commitment has been given to the water upgradation projects. So Japan has actually been pushing quite aggressively to assist India and upgrade its overall infrastructure.
In the last couple of years, we've seen that, Japan has been wanting to come into India, but by the time these investments really trickle in, it takes a lot of time. What is your assessment? How soon do we expect things to really change on ground as far as the infrastructure sector is concerned?
I think what you've seen this new government do in the last 18 months to 24 months has been quite dramatic in terms of putting in place a framework for absorbing such investments. Right. And the Japanese are responding to this framework. So I think that's policy certainty, the fact that we've gone into second stage reform programs, the fact that we're articulating large visions which can be implemented using superior technologies, permits people like the Japanese to come in and actually support India's investment and growth of infrastructure. So I am very hopeful that over the next 12 to 18 months, we will actually begin to see real investment flows from Japan into India.
But when you guys met the Japanese investors, when you met the Japanese government, what were the key asks? Because in India we've seen a lot of regulatory changes, we see a lot of policy uncertainty. Is that still the big overhang as far as investments are concerned?
Well, there are concerns, and I wouldn't say that there are no concerns, but we have traveled a long way since in the last few years. I think they have now come to realize that India is not going to be exactly like a developed country where everything is all smoothened out, but at the same time it holds promise for significant growth, it holds promise for large investments that can yield them good returns. They did talk about the rollout of the GST because some of the Japanese companies in interstate transfers are facing tax roadblocks, etc. So I think they got assured that it should happen sooner than later. and I think we all feel that it will possibly happen within this year. So that was one of the issues. The other, of course, that they are aware of is that Indian infrastructure is still to come up to speed, and it is being developed, but they are also very happy about the progress that we are making in that direction, and the fact that a lot of initiatives on roads, railways, ports, etc. are being taken.
As far as the infrastructure sector is concerned, Finance Minister Arun Jaitley in an interview to ET Now did mention that investment options, the flexibility of investment options will be very important to raise more capital, to attract more capital. Help us understand, in your meetings with the investors here, was that one of the issues that they spoke about? And what kind of investment flexibility are they looking forward to?
Well, I think the key thing, as Mr. Sankran mentioned, was the availability of a development financial institution, which we've, in India, been told will be the NIIF. I think the speed at which we get that off the ground and make that vehicle available for different investors to actually come in and route that funding through is critical.
But I think the amount of work that's been done in the last 2 years gives a very solid basis for absorbing these investments and taking them forward. It also provides the flexibility to actually divest mature assets and redeploy capital into new greenfield assets. This framework is now in place. So I'm very hopeful that the next year onwards, we'll see massive amounts of movement on the ground.
Do you think that things have significantly changed in the last 2 years? And in the next 3 years, what would you want to see from the government of India? As somebody who's invested in India, and for somebody who's come as a part of the FICCI delegation out here?
I think you need to make the distinction when you talk about infrastructure in two distinct components. One is the development model, which is the BOT type projects, or let's say in a sense today, the hybrid annuity model. The other is the EPC contracts that are being awarded. I think the spate of EPC contracts that the Ministry of Highways has awarded is unprecedented. So the work on the ground is proceeding at a feverish pace on the EPC contracts. Where there is a challenges, where there is development money to be invested in a private or a quasi-private kind of mode. Now there, because of the reluctance of the banking system in India, because of legacy issues, to further take exposure on the infrastructure sector, that is impacted right now, which is where the need for a development financial institution becomes paramount, that you need to have long-term money at low rates of interest available in a predictable manner for infrastructure to really take off in terms of private participation. So that, I think, is the linchpin on which it all hangs right now.
The fact of the matter is, if all the legacy arbitration come under the new legislation, it will significantly improve the cash flow of companies in the sector and unleash the private potential that's available in India to take this forward. So it's these kinds of last mile connections that need to be established and these issues that need to be sorted out. Otherwise, I personally feel that as a market, we are very large, we're growing very well, we have a policy that's very stable. There's really no reason why we can't unlock this potential if we can get over the difficulties private sector companies are having in the infrastructure sector and the banks themselves.
At this point of time, when the asset, the balance sheet of the banks only are so stressed, when do you see this pain easing? How do you see this cycle really turning for the Indian economy?
So two things. One is, of course, the bankruptcy code is one step in that direction to resolve disputes and to get over with the NPA issues. The other, of course, is that they have not a committee under Mr. Vinod Rai, and that committee is to help in resolving all the NPA issues where the banks were reluctant to take a haircut because they didn't know when the CBI or the CVC would go after them. So that is one mechanism that has been worked out. We are yet to see how it unfolds, but at least there is hope that it will find some solutions. The third, of course, and which I think is the most important, is the uptick in the economy, which we are seeing gradually happen. So as soon as the economy starts kicking back into shape, we will see that some of the NPA problems of some companies, particularly, for instance, some of the government measures taken recently have put the sugar mills back on track, the steel units back on track. So some of these large sectors have been put back on track. And as the economy improves a lot more, so the number which looks very, very threatening at this moment could be somewhat moderated once the economy starts to. Business is a risk-prone business, and it is prone to fail. But we need to distinguish between business failure and business fraud.
Right.
Those that have happened due to wrongdoing should be treated in another way, and those that have failed because of cyclical, global or other reasons need to be given some time. It's just like someone's health going wrong. You give him some time to recoup before you ask him to start running again.
Over 1,000 Japanese companies are already invested in India, and the largest pie from this are the Japanese automakers. And at a point of time when there is a lot of regulatory uncertainty in India, with the ban on diesel cars, with Delhi and Kerala going ahead and banning diesel cars, what is the road ahead for automakers? And this is exactly the reason why the chairman of Suzuki Motors, Osamu Suzuki, came and met the finance minister and also updated him about the company's Gujarat plant plans.
When it comes to Maruti Suzuki, the performance is going up very well. So I'm sure Maruti Suzuki has been loved by the Indian people. So I'm very much satisfied. According to different country, the way of calculating mileage, so it is not really a universal method for all over the world.
世界一律というわけにもいかないと思っております。やっぱりディーゼル
Diesel or gasoline. Rather than diving the car into these categories, you really have to think of how to reduce the overall exhaust gas from automobile. That is what we are thinking at the manufacturer's side.
メーカーとしては考えていかなくちゃいけないと思っております。はい、計画通り。
As planned, 2017 operations will start. Our plan is going accordingly.
できるように、計画通り進んでおります。
In fact, the FICCI delegation also met a whole host of Japanese parliamentarians to understand what kind of policy changes should be brought into India at this point of time to attract more investments. Listen in to Sunil Sangai of HSBC India on what should be the road ahead and what kind of interest has been evinced this time around from the Japanese investors.
Japan's involvement in Indian infrastructure is quite significant. Not just Delhi Metro, but Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor. Then now the latest, the bullet train, the high-speed train corridor. So they're quite involved in the Indian infrastructure. It's also matches with the Japanese skills and our needs. We need long-term financing. We need infrastructure. We need investment. Japan has surplus capital. They are looking for return. They are looking for long-term investment outside Japan for the growth. And therefore, I think that clearly there is a complementarity between Japan and India.
Right. Has there been any concerns so far from the Japanese investors? Because we know for a fact that regulatory uncertainty, taxation hurdles are something that drive investments away. What sort of a response have you got on the concerns that the Japanese investors really have?
I came to Japan a year and a half ago, soon after this government had come to power. And at that time, the general perception of the Japanese corporate was wait and watch. And these are the concerns which they were raising, the concerns which you talked about, the taxation, the decision making and things like that. This time round, surprisingly, in fact, it was all opportunity. They were all looking forward, looking for some opportunity, looking for, actually making investment and moving forward on that. So I guess given the amount of things which government have done, plus the way it has been communicated to outside India, I think these concerns are now no longer really a big concern.
But what were the key asks from the government? Because you see, in the last 2 years that we've seen in the government, a lot has been done. The government has moved on structural reforms. But where from here, what were the key asks of the Japanese investors, of the Japanese government from India?
I think the one thing which really came out and across the different sector, because this delegation as well as the minister had meetings across the different sector, people from the different sectors, is the projects. As which are the projects where they can really invest what is the viability of those projects and how should they go about investing into those projects, and what is in it for Japan. So can Japanese companies set up manufacturing facilities in India?
Right.
Can they bring in their ecosystem along with it, in the sense that their supplier network, their MSME network, and all of them, can they supply out of Japan? Can it aid to the growth of Japanese companies? I think those are the kind of questions. So they're going into the specifics, looking at specific projects, and now talking about the real.
You look at the capital markets very closely, and I have to ask this question to you. In India, the capital markets, there's not that much of depth that we would want to. There's very little penetration. What is it that India can really learn from Japan in terms of capital markets, and how to basically strengthen the capital markets?
Yeah. See, one of the areas which we discussed as a part of our delegation, as well as with some officials of the Ministry of Finance, is also bringing different kind of instruments to the capital market. This learning we can draw not only from Japan but from the rest of the world as well. And I think the government is really focused on and working on allowing different kind of instruments, not just the pure equity or pure debt. Once we see a lot of long-term foreign investments coming in, which has happened in the last 1 year, there is a transition from portfolio investment to FDI.
Right.
Our FDI has gone up significantly. I think you will see the market deepening more and more, and much faster than what we are thinking of.
That's all from here in Tokyo today. Thanks for watching ET Now, and stay tuned for more news and updates.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow, and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.